Ukraine will receive new fighter jets next year already. That's what the Ukrainian president said, but we'll talk about this as well as about anything else that has happened along the front lines and behind them in this sitrep about the war in Ukraine. Before we start off, United 24 is doing once again a donation campaign, this time to allow people to see again. All the details are in the description. Your donations are very appreciated. The Ukrainians have struck an electrical substation in Volgograd. According to Ukraine, it is providing the defense industry with electricity. Obviously, a reason to strike in Volgograd when there are lots of electrical substations closer than this. We'll switch to the developments along the front line, and I have nothing to report from Sumy or from the Vovchansk area. So we go directly to Veliki Bodoluk, and here, while the deep state map has increased the area under Russian control by this year, we have Ukrainians saying that the occupation of the town of Bolohivka that I showed you in the last sitrep was only temporarily. According to them, the Russians lost a lot of men while trying to infiltrate there. Then they showed their flag and were withdrawing. Whether or not that's true, I cannot confirm. We'll switch to the area of Kupiansk, and here we have the Ukrainians east of Piszczane in an area previously considered to be contested. We have the Ukrainians right here along the railroad tracks, and this is more or less at this point here, so the Ukrainians are a little further than previously thought. That's it from this direction. I have no changes in the Borova direction or in the Liman direction. So we go directly to Siversk, and here the Russians have entered the town of Dronivka, which is here. We see them almost at the bridge, but as you can see, the bridge is destroyed. The Russians will not be able to use it once they take the town of Dronivka. We have it here, so the Russians are now in this direction. Dronivka has now been reached. Whether or not the Russians have consolidated is a different question, though likely so far they have not. The Russians have also advanced southeast of Siversk. We have the geolocation for this as well. Directly southeast of Siversk, we see that was more or less at this point, so the Russians keep closing in from the southwest to the town of Siversk. That's it from this direction. In the Kostiantynivka region here, we have no changes along the front line, but we do have a Russian mill blogger saying that the situation there is that the Ukrainians still hold it. Now he's claiming that this is completely cut off here on the east, the reservoir. I cannot confirm this with the geolocations. While we have seen Russians fairly close to the reservoir, they have not necessarily consolidated their positions there. Regardless, he's saying that the Ukrainians are able to resupply their soldiers down here with heavy duty drones, and they're even able to do rotations by using small boats over the reservoir. So according to him, the Ukrainians are actually still keeping ground lines of communication open to the Ukrainian positions in this direction, and this is obviously slowing down the Russians quite massively. In the Dobropilia direction, the Russians continue to force successes with continuous attacks with mechanized equipment. We have them here in the direction of Pankivka at various points where the Russians have lost once again mechanized equipment. This is more or less in this direction here. Several once again have been destroyed. Several pieces of equipment by the Russians. In part, they have been showing some success, though. They have advanced to a certain degree north of Rusin Yar. Here, the Russians have roughly reached this point. Whether or not they survived there, whether the infantry that disembarked is still holding positions there, is obviously a vastly different question. As of now, I cannot confirm that. I also cannot prove the opposite. So we just know that Russian mechanized equipment was operating in this direction. According to the Ukrainians, the Russians used the bad weather for their mechanized attacks. Here, one example was with 15 units of heavily armored vehicles. Still, though, the Ukrainian anti-tank units so far are successful and are stopping the Russians from advancing in many cases with their mechanized equipment. Still, though, from the town of Shachove, we have Russians geolocated in the north itself. We see the pro-Ukrainian deep state map is already showing this as being contested. So the Russians have entered Shachove and are trying to reconnect eastwards with the rest of their positions, the Russians that are cut off north of Mayak. The Russians have been pushed back, though, close to Nowy Shachove, here in this direction. So the Russians try to push eastwards while the Ukrainians come from the west. We have that geolocated here at this point, with the Ukrainians showing their presence in this direction. This is, if I'm not wrong, in this direction here. Let me see. Nowy Shachove. Yeah, this is here. So this area was liberated by the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians also advanced into Suchetske. This is a little further south. We have that here, close to Rodinske. The Ukrainians have raised their flag here and were able to push the Russians back. The situation in Rodinske is unclear as of now. As we can see, the Ukrainians have capabilities in this region. Whether they've been able to push the Russians back or not is unclear, though. The Pokrovsk region, we have the Russians advancing in the further into northern Pokrovsk. We see that they've almost reached or closing in on the northern side of Pokrovsk. Recently, they've operated here, they've been here, but now we see them even further north. This means that the Russians are now operating further north than before into Pokrovsk itself. We see that now they are more or less at this position here and are obviously threatening the lines of communication here as well with their presence. The Russian chief of the general staff, Gerasimov, has claimed that Russia has encircled the Ukrainians in Pokrovsk and in Mirnograd. So basically here, and he claimed 5,500 Ukrainian soldiers are being cut off here. Now we see that the Ukrainian lines of communication are under threat and are under Russian fire control, but neither have they been cut off, nor is it likely that they are 5,500 men. If the Ukrainians actually had 5,500 men in this point, would the Russians be so successful penetrating deeply into Pokrovsk with just 250 men if the Ukrainians had 5,500 available here? That's the big question here, and to me this is absurd. I can obviously not tell you how many Ukrainian soldiers are still here in the pocket, but I would not be surprised if it's less than 1,000 and probably quite sizably less than that, maybe 800 or something. We have infantry there, we have artillery units there, there is logistics there, there are also drone pilots, but overall the front line is so thinly held by the Ukrainians that the Russians can spread out inside of the cities. According to the Russians, there are sometimes positions that are held by the Ukrainians, and if they fall, then half of the street even falls to the Russians because there are no more other positions. And these individual positions aren't held by 20 men or by 50 men. They are held by 2 or 3 Ukrainians. And thus, if you see the overall situation, it's close to impossible that 5,500 Ukrainians are supposed to be in there. And that's not just me saying this. We also have Russian military bloggers writing about this. He says, first of all, there is no encirclement of 6 to 7 brigades, and it's also unlikely that furthermore, it is highly unlikely that a multi-thousand strong Ukrainian armed forces group is still entrenched within the Pokrovsk-Mirnograd agglomeration, basically confirming what I said before, that the likelihood of the Ukrainians being in there in these huge numbers is close to impossible. This is being confirmed at various points from various mill bloggers. Basically, he's saying here he wonders if he's lying because there's still 6 kilometers open between the Ukrainian positions to resupply Pokrovsk. Now, we talked about it in the past that this is increasingly getting dramatic, the situation, but having been cut off and 5,500 physically encircled is simply not happening. And we have them here claiming that the Ukrainians might be supplied for a couple of months by drones. So even if the Russians are closing the pocket, that does not mean that the Ukrainians will simply give up. They can keep up the fighting for a couple of months simply by drones, by drone supply, according to Russian mill bloggers. That's it from the Pokrovsk direction, and we have one more series of changes in the Hulia-Pole direction. Here we have the Russians in Privilne, which is up here, this here, and Novomykolaiv down here. In these two positions, we have various Russian geolocations. We see Privilne, basically all over Privilne, so we can expect Privilne is likely taken by the Russians, and we have the same here in Novomykolaiv, various positions here. This is either indicating that the Russians have fully occupied it or that the Ukrainian presence is negligible now, and at the very least it is a gray zone, but likely the Russians have taken Novomykolaiv as well as the town of Privilne. And one of the reasons why that was it, by the way, with territorial changes along the front line, and one of the reasons why this is happening so slowly, why the advances are so slow, is illustrated by this video here. This supposedly is from the Pokrovsk direction, and it shows how the air is currently looking. These are heavy-duty drones, so bomber drones, but also drones that can resupply. And you see it almost looks like like flocks of birds in the air. The amount of drones that are circling all around it, that clearly shows how difficult it is for the Russians to infiltrate, to do mechanized attacks, to bring soldiers, to be able to bring soldiers to bear in these directions. That's it with the territorial changes along the front line. We have news about hybrid warfare. The British justice system has sentenced gang members for trying to help Russia by torching Ukrainian aid in Great Britain. That was ordered and paid for by the Wagner Group. Supposedly the damage was £1 million, and they have been caught, obviously, and now have been sentenced. There's also the claim, the threat, excuse me, the claim that the Russians are using the wreckage of the Estonia for training and for espionage technology. The Estonia was a ferry that sunk in 1994 from Sweden to Estonia, and it went down with 852 men on board, and thus is being considered a naval a ship grave. As a grave, it is not allowed to dive there, and thus it's being left alone. So it's ideal for the Russians to aid train navigation and at the same time install technology for surveillance, as it is they are the only ones diving around there. At least those are the claims. Then the airport of Vilnius had to be closed because of balloons coming from Belarus. 47 flights were affected. And Lithuania is likely going to close the border to Belarus as a reaction. In troop generation on the Russian side, we have the Moscow Times reporting here that the production is slowing down dramatically. The increase of the production, but in parts, production has even been reduced. At the same time, the US finance minister said that the Russian income from oil and gas has already shrunk by 20%, whereas US sanctions can add an additional 20 to 30% in this regard. All of this while the Russians are dependent at 30% of their budget for oil and gas. Russia has, because of that, reduced its payment for volunteers in many of the oblasts, which will mean less recruits, as was talked about in the past here on this channel. The Russians have also claimed to have tested the Burevestnik, a nuclear-powered cruise missile. They claim to have tested it successfully. It is highly questionable, though, of the actual usability and of the actual use of this missile. So this will be probably addressed in a separate video. In troop generation on the Ukrainian side, Zelensky said that the Gripen will come, the first Gripen will come in 2026. The first are expected to arrive next year. So according to him, the Swedish are already going to deliver Gripen to Ukraine next year. As we recently discussed, the Ukrainians and the Swedes have signed a memorandum for 100 to 150 Gripen-E. Right now, according to what I found, the production rate is roughly 10 pieces a year, but according to some claims, the Swedish company Saab has a capacity of 25 jets a year if there is a need for it, and if basically there are orders to justify such an increase of production. So right now it seems likely that the Swedes will hand over some of their own orders and keep their older Gripen longer in operation. Sweden is one of the fully convinced supporters of Ukraine. Sweden doesn't hold back with its support, so this would kind of make sense that they say, if the Ukrainians stop the Russians, we won't have to fight anytime soon, so we can wait 2 more years for a new fighter jet. If this fighter jet stops the Russians inside of Ukraine, that at least is my interpretation. Then we also have Zelensky admitting that there are issues with the production of the Flamingo. There are supposedly technical problems, according to the claims. According to the Ukrainian president, one of the reasons was the lack of financing. Ukraine has now used own financial means to allow for the financing. There are other claims that I cannot confirm, that supposedly the targeting was some issue, and that would explain it, that apparently foreign backers have not provided enough targeting equipment to allow for the missile to be successful, but this is more guessing than hard facts. According to the Ukrainian president, currently 2 to 3 of the missiles are produced daily. As we've discussed in the past, the big employment of these missiles is still missing. Even if it's only 2 a day, that would be 60 a month, and we have definitely not seen numbers anywhere close to this being employed in the past. Then we have the Ukrainians saying that they are currently recruiting 30,000 men a month. This would mean that basically they fulfill their quota. There are current calculations that the Russians are suffering 5 times as many losses along the front line, which is perfectly reasonable regarding how the advances are currently being achieved and how the losses are being occurred in the no man's land, where there's no medical evacuation, where that single infantrymen without armor are advancing. If they're found, they're basically as good as dead and being killed by drones. So all of this makes a lot of sense, that the Russians suffer significantly more losses. If the Ukrainians were to recruit 30,000 a month, that would mean that they would have enough soldiers, and we do not see this along the front line. So either the Ukrainians have much higher losses than initially anticipated, or the AWOL rate is much bigger than publicly known. There are claims like this, and some claims that at times soldiers simply go AWOL and go to another unit that fills where they feel safer, and then they are being registered as a new recruit. So the numbers simply do not add up in full, at least if we look along the front line. In the political sphere, the coalition of the willing has agreed to a 5-point plan. They want to basically push out Russian oil and gas from the global markets with sanctions and other means. Billions of euros of frozen Russian money is going to be used for Ukraine, and the pressure on Putin is to be increased with long-range weapons. Also, work on security guarantees for Ukraine will continue. The US finance minister said in an interview with CBS, well, I think Russia is going to feel the pain immediately. I can tell you that we've already seen India has done a complete halt of Russian oil purchases. Many of the Chinese refineries have stopped. And then he talks about the Russian propagandist. Of course, the Russian economy is a wartime economy. Growth is virtually zero. Inflation, I believe, is over 20%. And everything we do is going to bring Putin to the table. It's oil that funds the Russian war machine, and I think we can make a substantial dent in his profits. So this was said before, and from the Russian side, there are even some some voices that admit that the US sanctions can cause problems. If the US is serious with forcing Russia to the table by increasing pressure, they are likely capable of doing so. The big question will obviously be if the current US government is actually willing to do so. And in international support, we have France promising additional Aster missiles. Those are air defense missiles for the SAMPT system, and more Mirage 2000 fighter jets that will be delivered to Ukraine. And the United Kingdom will increase and speed up the delivery of the 5,000 missiles they have promised for Ukraine. Those should be the small missiles for air defense usage, which Ukrainians can use to shoot down drones. And that was it for today's sitrep. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment if you have something to add. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. In the comment section, in the description, you can see the link to the campaign to collect donations from United24. If you have something to spare, it would be much appreciated. But that was it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.